and welcome to the Bechdel Theatre Podcast.
The podcast where we talk about gender and representation on stage.
I'm Pippa.
And I'm Beth.
And we're your hosts. So, happy 2019.
Happy New Year.
Is it happy? I feel like everyone's having some kind of January blues.
I've got January blues, but I've also got a lot of hope and optimism for the new year.
Oh, great. Yeah, I could do with some of that. So,
this episode, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Naomi Paxton, who is a theatre historian, academic / stand-up comic magician performer, multitude of jobs, super clever, super funny, and she has an exhibition currently on the National Theatre that we went to see. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And then we have a whole load of recommendations for you from Vault Festival, which is starting up again. Feels like it ended about 5 minutes ago.
I know, I can't believe it's happening again. So we are right on the cusp of the launch of Vault 2K19. Or 2K Biting, as some people are calling it. Last year we had 2018 and this year is 20 Biting. Apparently, and everyone can only have 1 year.
Yeah, only 1 year for you.
But we so far have come across loads of shows that are going to smash the Bechdel test and general good representation. So we're going to tell you the ones that are on our radar at the end of the episode. So stick around. And also, just to say, we recorded in the National Theatre Littleton Lounge, so the one above the foyer, and apologies for the increase in background noise that comes in kind of towards the last part of the interview as people started coming in for shows, which is what normal people do in theatres. But first, on to Naomi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
We're here in the National Theatre, joined by the wonderful Dr. Naomi Paxton.
Hello.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Naomi?
Yes, hello, my name's Naomi. I'm a researcher and a performer and a comic and all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of things.
Amazing. And what are your pronouns for our listeners?
She, her, hers.
Lovely.
Great. We're here in the National Theatre because of this very special exhibition that you've curated, which is all about the Actresses Franchise League.
Yeah.
And that's your specialist subject.
Yeah, so it's about the contribution of theatre professionals to the suffrage movement, which has been kind of something I've been researching since about 2008, and I absolutely love, and it's just great to have had this space at the National to tell a little bit of, or little bits of the stories that I found that just show how inventive and creative and dynamic the theatre around suffrage was.
So it's like a little taster into the world of the Actresses Franchise League.
Yeah, the Actresses Franchise League and the people they were working with and the ideas and the themes they were working with and what they wanted to achieve. A lot of it, I think, which is why I love it, it's very relevant to where we are today in terms of representation and access and hierarchies and kind of systemic inequality. And they were really fighting that well over 100 years ago as well, very vocally. So I kind of wanted it to be even more in the public domain to say, look, we have strong shoulders to stand on. These arguments have been going on for a long time, and this is how people were trying to tackle them then.
Yeah.
That's something that we always talk about, isn't it? Like looking to the people before us and seeing what we can learn from them, because these are ongoing conversations and battles. To go back to the beginning of the Actresses Franchise League, who were they, how were they formed, and what did they do?
Excellent questions. So they were formed in 1908. They were made up of mostly kind of quite high profile at the time, in the core group, quite high profile performers, so actors, musical comedy performers, women and men actually, and they formed to use their powers for good, so to work within the theatrical profession, outside of it, to put on propaganda plays, to do education, to do speaking classes, really to do what they could. Many of them were members of other suffrage societies, and they were deliberately neutral regarding tactics, which means they had both militant and constitutional members, and that's something that I think really helped them going forward. They didn't kind of get bogged down in the politics of militancy and non-militancy. I mean, it was tricky within the organisation, but they were a broad church, and any woman who was or had been in the theatrical profession be a member. So there was dancers, composers, choreographers, producers, designers, all kinds of people. And then by 1913, they had over 900 members, women members, and they had a separate men's league as well, because there are lots of men in the theatre who are very supportive, and they had a group of over 100 patrons, including people like Christabel Pankhurst. So they produced or commissioned over 100 suffrage plays in 7 years. And plays can be anything from like a monologue to a comedy sort of song, to a poem, to a three-act drama. And they published their own work, and their work was also published by other societies. And they performed up and down the country. So when I first discovered them, I think the impression was in theatre histories that it kind of been sort of three well-meaning women in big hats once doing something noble. And then when I actually started reading the plays and reading the research that had been done, I was just blown away by how inventive and passionate they were, and how, I think the thing that really touched me was that they were kind of out feminists in the industry, that they were talking about these things, and they had so many male allies who were also talking about these things, and that made me really excited, because I sometimes think that's what we lack today. So they actually carried on going until 1958, getting involved in all kinds of really interesting projects. Suffrage plays sort of stopped in 1914, but they did loads of war work. They started loads of different projects and initiatives, and were involved in kind of networking in and out of the theatre industry and the feminist movement, including the Equal Pay campaign, for example, right up until the 1950s, yeah.
And so, to kind of paint the landscape of what British society and the role of the arts and theatre was at that time, who were the kind of women who were able to join this league? Were the people who were the composers, the playwrights, the producers? You know, how did kind of race intersect with that, or class? Was it kind of like a mixture of people, or was it already people who kind of had the ability to explore the art?
I don't know, it's a real mix. As the membership goes on, there's a real mix. So we do have kind of music hall performers. There are young actresses. I think it actually would have been quite advantageous to join the Actresses Franchise League if you were a young actress who was leaving, say, Sarah Thorne's drama school in Margate or somewhere, because actually you then got access to new work and a number of very important people in the profession who would give you work. So it could have been quite on side to say that you're a suffragist. So they definitely, I don't think they have an issue regarding class. Certainly in the plays they use class in the way that we would now in kind of comedy working class characters, but often they twist that on its head, and the working class characters are the ones with nous and the upper class characters are the idiots. They also don't venerate, say, domesticity and motherhood in the way that some other kind of propaganda elements of the suffrage movement do. Quite a lot of the women involved in the league are very single, they stay single. Again, we don't want to posthumously queer anybody, but we know that some of them were involved in long-term relationships with other women. So the issue of kind of motherhood and marriage is something that is contested in the plays, and it's something that's chewed over, and loss of agency. And those things are really interesting for now. In terms of race, that's really tricky as well. And we know that 3 of the founder members were Anglo-Indian, were born in India and may have been of mixed parentage, but we're not sure. We know that Pixie Coleman-Smith, who was a designer at the Lyceum, and an illustrator, spent most of her childhood in Jamaica and used to tell Jamaican and Nancy stories at big gatherings. But it's hard to pinpoint people of different ethnicities in the movement. However, none of the plays, unlike American suffrage plays, which can be quite overtly racist, none of the British suffrage plays are. They will be more classist and use that knowingly than racist. That's a very different situation in the States.
It's funny because for our listeners, we're sitting right by the Judy and Punch part of the exhibition, which talks about how the story of Punch and Judy was often turned on its head because normally the baby and Judy get killed.
Yeah. I saw some Punch and Judy in Bournemouth recently, and a lot of the parents were quite shocked. Like, everyone stood going, I forgot what this was like when I sat my kids down in the front.
They're bludgeoning each other,
yeah.
And so in this one, they turn it on its head, so talking about the idea of domesticity, and also I feel like this was somewhere I noticed where they talk about specifically breaking down sex and class prejudice.
That was the Drummers' Union, which was a children's union, specific to join and break down sex and class prejudice. This really interested me, Judy and Punch. I'm super excited about this because it seems such a weird medium to kind of have a suffrage message. And we know when this was first performed, it was performed by members of the men's political union, which was the militant men's group. They were performing the Suffrage Punch and Judy shows that women had written. So I like to think not only that maybe Judy is obviously a suffragist, but Punch is a suffragist as well. You know, he's being performed by suffragist men, and maybe that Punch is punching up against the government instead of across the playboard at his wife. And what's interesting for this as well is that, like, the legacy of Punch and Judy now is, it is quite shocking, but also there are still quite a lot of there's very few female Punch and Judy professors, which is what the title is for performers.
I didn't know.
Yeah, Punch and Judy professors. There's very few female ones, and the issue of feminism and domestic violence particularly has been so controversial over the kind of past sort of 50 years. There's been a real backlash, and from published work from some professors who say, it's political correctness gone mad, and they've lost lots of things. They've lost Toby the dog, because you can't have animals on stage anymore, and they've often lost the hanging scene. Apparently, that was an issue, maybe around kind of Saddam Hussein or stuff. They've lost the killing of the baby often, particularly around Jamie Bulger, when these things became problematic in public space. But there's been a real backlash against the idea that the domestic violence is a problem, and that this could be represented in any other way. So actually, when I was looking back at Suffrage, Punch and Judy, I was thinking it was probably a lot more radical in 1911 than it is now.
Even now,
It's extraordinary. But I think it's an amazing medium, and it also shows that they're targeting children, that they're showing them that things can be different, and that they're embracing kind of traditional art forms as well as new art forms.
And that they're taking up public space as well.
Yep.
Like, it's interesting that not just with Punch and Judy, but I was kind of looking at the different spaces that suffrage plays are performed in at the beginning, where it says they were performed in theatres, but they were performed in all kinds of different, like, one was a vegetarian restaurant.
Yep.
And
very big in vegetarian restaurants.
I was like, is that the lesbians?
Without posthumously querying anyone, Pippa. The vegetarian restaurants were very popular.
Some of them were definitely lesbian. And also I was doing a research project about suffrage meetings and realising how many were held in outdoor spaces. So, like, in seaside towns, kind of on the beach, or in public. Also, it's expensive to hire a hall, but they're not hiding away. They're deliberately kind of looking to have interactions with people and to have dialogue with people and to change people's minds and have those conversations. They're not just wanting people to sit and then disagree with them quietly. They really want to kind of actively advocate for what they believe in.
It's kind of like what I would kind of look at today as like applied theatre practice, kind of like, in a sense, going into non-traditional settings. Was there a lot of theatre that did that anyway, or was it kind of very radical and quite a political move for them to do that?
The New Woman plays are the ones that particularly Ibsen, for example, who, many of these actresses who are involved in the League have been performing Ibsen and Strindberg and kind of Chekhov and all sorts of plays that are talking about women differently and women's space differently and relationships differently. Shaw is also involved, and his wife Charlotte Shaw is involved as well. I don't think there have been particularly plays that advocate for women's suffrage in the kind of 1890s and early 1900s. The suffrage plays idea comes in sort of after that. I mean, in 1907, Elizabeth Robbins, who's an American actress, one of the first women to perform Ibsen in this country, writes a play called Votes for Women, which is a 3-act play around the suffrage struggle, and that's kind of before the founding of the League. But then she goes on to be one of the founder members of the League. But really, suffrage plays begin to explore, as I said, other issues. So it's not all about the vote. It is about sexual harassment, equal access to education, employment opportunities, people having legal rights over their children, people's voices being heard, people being excluded from kind of hierarchies of power. Those things, that they were writing about what they wanted the vote to change, not just about wanting the vote.
And there's also the interesting, getting back to the next bit of the exhibition that we're beside here, there's the kind of immersive theatre element to it as well. Like, something, again, we think of now as like, oh, you can go and have like a one-on-one experience, and that seems like a very modern thing and trendy thing that people do now 100 years later. But actually, there's part of this exhibition which shows that the suffragists and suffragettes and the Actresses Franchise League were doing that as part of big exhibitions. Is that right?
So we've got here, which I'm thrilled about, in the Littleton Lounge, we've got kind of a mock-up of a prison cell installation, which they first started doing in 1909 at exhibitions. So basically they built a couple of cells that were made to the exact kind of size and kitted out exactly as they would have been in Holloway Prison. So that was the London one where a lot of suffragettes were getting incarcerated. This happened just before the forcible feeding starts, the first one in 1909, although it does carry on afterwards. You could pay £6 to go inside and meet a real suffragette prisoner. So suffragette prisoners were playing the parts of prisoner and wardress. So that's really brilliant, I think. Not only to go in and experience like a bit of the cell environment without anything like the cold, the smell, the noise, the stigma of going to an actual prison, but also they heard a lot about these women, particularly in the media. They were kind of vilified as just sort of loud, noisy, ugly, mannish, incoherent, disappointed, frustrated women campaigning for something, who knows, we don't care. Whereas actually when you got into the prison cell, you could speak to a real woman who could tell you why she got involved, what she did, what impact that had, basically humanise that story. I think it's an interesting space. It's interesting when we think about like the PTSD of ex-suffrage prisoners, that they had a lot. What must it have been like actually to be cooped up in that cell all day inside an exhibition, constantly talking to people? There's a voyeuristic element of people coming in wanting to kind of experience a little bit of it. There was a journalist actually in Glasgow, when these cells were in Glasgow in I think 1911, who her whole thing was about the rough and unlovely garments on show. She was a fashion correspondent, but her big takeaway was how rough and unlovely the clothes were, not apparently about suffrage activism, although that may have just been for her column. But I think that's a really interesting space, and what we've done here, which I'm really pleased about, so there's a picture we've blown up of one of the demonstrators at the time in the 1999 exhibition, and then that's kind of bookended by two pictures that a woman drew while she was in Holloway. She had a copy of Shelley, poems of Shelley, and she drew the front and back of her cell, and that was in LSE Library. So I asked if we could blow that up, so you can kind of see an impression of the cell from suffragettes' eyes, as well as a kind of representation of the sort of female demonstrator. But it was really about getting the message across. So many mainstream media outlets were shutting down the message and not allowing these women to actually speak.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I love the idea that they're representing themselves.
Yeah, representing themselves, but also kind of constructing a story in the way that you would do now. What are the common threads of this? What is acceptable in this space? What's acceptable for children and old people to hear? I would love to be a fly on the wall in that and hear those conversations. And also, what was it like for the women to perform in those spaces, and what were they performing? And how did maybe that impact on their future incarcerations, if they had any, or their other telling of their suffrage experiences. So it's super chewy and interesting. And yeah, you've got like site-specific installations in 1909 that they're not naive, they're experimental. They're deliberately trying to construct new ways to make their voices heard and make other people's voices heard. One of the things about the suffrage movement was that many kind of middle-class women, for example, including actresses who would never really been in prison, got in prison for practically nothing much of the time, and then experienced the lives of other women who didn't have their voices, who the public weren't particularly interested in, the media weren't interested in. So they came out, and many of them became involved in prison reform campaigns and trying to talk about kind of working mothers or single mothers or sex workers or people who were potentially on the margins of society and had a lack of representation. The suffragettes kind of thought, well, we've met them, we've seen them, we've spent time with them, we can advocate for these people and we can try and change their stories and the future of their lives, really.
I'm really interested in that you mentioned sex workers.
Yeah.
What was kind of the standpoint of suffragettes and suffragists on sex workers? You say that they met them and...
Well, it's a huge issue as it is now, on both sides. Some people are very pejorative. Many people sort of, again, kind of don't victim blame and blame the system and the lack of agency, the fact they can't make work any other way, they can't get money in any other way. Let's look at the Johns, let's not look at the women doing it. Let's think about their safety. I mean, all the same conversations that are going on now.
So why haven't we made
100
enough
years
progress?
ago, 1909.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me that they were doing this installation in 1909. The Actresses Franchise League was founded in 1908. You were saying you started researching it in 2008.
Yeah.
It's like amazing the symmetry of it.
Yeah.
That it was, and then it was, it's been now 10 years since you've been looking into it. You've got this brain full of all these.
I never could have thought,
and
when I first started researching it, I just was an actress going, wow, oh my gosh, I never anticipated going this far.
Becoming
And now
Dr. Naomi Paxton.
But I did want people to know about it, and I just wanted to share that energy and share those plays. Again, the history of women's writing, there's so much brilliant writing and chewy writing about feminist issues from this period.
And funny as well,
Yeah.
because I've seen and performed in some of these suffrage plays that you've personally unearthed from the archives that might never have been performed or seen the light of day again, and some of them are so funny. It's great how much which is a surprise, because as an actor, sometimes you look at historical plays or plays that were written a long time ago, the jokes don't really translate, but a lot of them in the suffrage plays do, because the conversations are, because sadly it's not that long ago, but also times haven't changed that much.
Yeah.
And they know
which
what they're
is
doing.
kind of a
They're,
sad
they're
thing.
professional playwrights.
Yeah.
So they put on with plays in the West End, and you know, they're not. Some of them are just first-time playwrights, but many of them, this is their career, and they write really well. And of course, if you can make people laugh, you bring them much closer to you than sort of giving them a lesson. Very few of them are a lesson. They're mostly going, ooh, let's look at the points of connection we have. Let's not look at the differences. Let's look at things that we have in common, and then let's talk about those things. Or let's present the opposing viewpoint. Many of them have anti-suffragists. We've got videos in the exhibition, which are also on YouTube actually, which present the anti-suffragist point of view, because they're not afraid to tackle this. It's not a fear. Yeah, let's expose this for what it is. Why shouldn't women be treated equally as men? Why shouldn't they have agency over their bodies? Why shouldn't they have their own political representation? Why should they pay taxes but not have a say in the laws that govern them? Why? Let's hear the arguments, let's expose them, and then let's skip off and go, come on, you know, smash the system. So they're very confident, and funny, which is just great. The other thing at the exhibition I love is we've got 2 tables, and there's decals on the tables with there's 50 different suffrage plays on each table, and I really wanted to kind of get those out there, just see the range of people writing them, women and men, and the different dates, the different titles. So some sound quite serious, people go and see this play, and some just sound daft and silly. And that's absolutely the energy of the whole movement, really.
You've also got a little bit about suffragette jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
Oh yes, I love that.
That is
I didn't know
fascinating.
jiu-jitsu was in the country at that time.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know when it came over.
It was hugely popular. So 1890s, I think it came over.
Right.
So Edith Garrard, who is pictured there, I think with her husband, William
Dressed
Garrard,
as a policeman.
Dressed as a policeman. So she was 5 foot tall, actually. So she had her own dojo in the end by Regent Street. But she first started learning from 2 Japanese jiu-jitsu instructors they came over in the 1890s, and they were teaching at they were doing demonstrations actually, in music halls and things. It was quite a popular, there was a big Victorian Health and Strength, and so come and fight the jiu-jitsu person. But she actually learned from this guy. He was called Edward Barton Wright. He had an amazing moustache, and he set up this school of arms and physical culture on Shaftesbury Avenue. And he had Japanese jiu-jitsu instructors, and he had a French style of kickboxing, and he had a Swiss style of wrestling. And he combined all these 3 martial arts to form something called Bartitsu, which he named after himself. Which was supposed to be kind of like women could do it as well, because it was supposed to be it's defensive essentially. You're not attacking, you're taking somebody else's weight or using your skills against them, which is why it was so popular in the movement. But actually, that's the martial art that Sherlock Holmes is supposed to have done. Conan Doyle wrote in. Yes, he wrote it as Baritsu, but it's Bartitsu. When he throws Moriarty off the Reichenbach Falls, he's using a Bartitsu move, and that's based on Edward Barton Wright's School of Physical Arms and Culture. So she learned there, then she ended up opening her own dojo and held self-defence classes for suffragettes twice weekly.
Wow.
And these demonstrations, again, are brilliant. So a 3-act kind of demonstration of suffragitsu. So her against the policeman, so seemingly overwhelming odds, the tiny woman versus the huge, and then she manages to flip him every time. It was basically saying, which was also countering arguments that women couldn't vote because they couldn't fight, for example. So we're not having women voting when they can't go to war. She's saying, well, it's not about physical strength, it's about skill, it's about knowledge, it's about prowess. I can overcome anybody because I can think this through, I am confident and I know what I'm doing, not just because I'm going to run into the fray. So it's telling an awful lot of stories, and it's also really hard for people to disagree with it, I would say. Even if you don't agree with militancy, there's no blood happening here. She is defensive, the policeman rushes her, and then she manages to turn that on her head. So the storytelling of it is also very layered. It's not just 2 people fighting.
Look at what the police are doing to us.
It's that as well. So there's an awful lot going, and it's all very lovely and all very funny, and we've been talking a lot about it this year, but I think it's a really, really interesting example of performing women's bodies and women's agency in public space that is essentially kind of a non-verbal, which, as we know, is hugely influential and something that people kind of are drawn to.
And so all this information and research, I'm really interested to know, where do you go to research? what archives are there? How do you find all this information?
So there was kind of a resurgence in the 80s. A few academics were researching there, so I kind of started there with their books. And then the records of the Actresses Franchise League up to 1914 are in the LSE library, the Women's Library. So when I first started, it was at London Met, and now it's at LSE. There's a little bit about the Actresses Franchise League and the Women's Theatre in Bristol Theatre Collection. Plays are in the British Library. The unpublished ones are in the Lord Chamberlain's Plays manuscript collection, so I've sifted through many, many plays and typed them up by hand, spent days there typing them up.
I bet they passed the Bechdel test.
Many of them do, yeah, they do. And in the US, I went to the Library of Congress, where they have the archive of a British actress called Mae Whitty. And they also have the archive of an American actress called Fola La Follette, who is wonderful, who does site-specific performances on the New York subway and all kinds of amazing stuff.
Oh, wow.
And her and her husband's an amazing feminist writer who marched in the suffrage parades and stuff. So that was very cool. And then the New York Public Library as well. But I got really lucky when I first started researching in 2010 properly. I went on Women's Hour because I put some of the plays on just to check I wasn't going mad. And they were all rubbish, and they weren't, they were great. And somebody got in touch and said, we've got a trunk in the attic, my great aunt. She was one of the founder members of the League. Would you like to have a look? I'd love to have a look, thank you very much. So that's when I discovered that it went up until 1958, because she had minute books there from the 1940s, and previously we thought it just kind of petered out and died in the 1930s, and no, it was absolutely going on. So then that opened up a whole other field of research. There was stuff in the Wellcome Library and all over the place. So it's been, most of it's kind of hidden in plain sight, to be honest. But the other huge area of research has been suffrage newspapers, most of which are online, and actually just trawling through those, looking at who's doing what where, what meetings, what plays, so there, and also The Era, which was a really big theatrical newspaper at the time. Trawling through that for reviews. They're quite sniffy about suffrage. They're really not helpful. It could have been so different if they'd been helpful, but they're not. But they do give snide reviews, and they do have the Actors Franchise League write in and tell them what meetings are happening and when and who's speaking. So just literally trawling through information. But I love all that. I love that part of it.
Yeah, I remember in my first year at uni, I went to uni in London, and I did a module called Performance in History, which at first, like, I was never too enthused by history at school, and at first I was like, oh no, is this going to be really boring? And actually, it was a module where you got to go off and research a theatre or a time, and go to the V&A archives and suddenly see all this material.
Oh, yeah, V&A, I didn't mention that.
Oh yeah. And I found it so incredible, just seeing all this stuff from the 1800s. I think I went to the Garrick archives actually.
Oh, the Garrick, yeah.
Yeah, which is very funny. It was like this old men's building, and I was just like there, like, hi, can I read some stuff? But it was something that I had never seen before. I'd never opened my eyes to any of that kind of, archival material or anything like that, and it's completely brought to life.
It's amazing. And the Lord Chamberlain plays at the British Library I just loved, because you look up the titles like in a card index file, and then they bring up these like Harry Potter tomes of ancient books, because basically all plays had to be sent to the censor and approved before they could be produced, which is one of the things about this period. People go, where are the plays about force feeding? Where are the plays about? They were not published by the censor. So everything that is published or is allowed to be performed is licensed by the censor. Everything that is performed is, has to be necessarily quite subtle in its portrayal. But yeah, they're amazing. And then you can look through the other plays that were submitted that day, that month. So you just read the mad kind of variety of work that was going on, and also come across some really interesting things. Like reviews, for example. So there'll be like some comedy suffragette in a review, and I'll have gone for that one little bit and then end up reading the entire and go, oh, this is amazing. So that's been a huge treat. And I think
women reviewing, or was it men who were reviewing?
I meant reviews as in
reviews.
Sorry,
as in review.
As in
with a U.
Review
yes.
with a U. Right.
Yes. But women reviewing in the suffrage newspapers and men reviewing in the mainstream newspapers.
Classic. And being sniffy about them.
Yeah.
Great. Do you find yourself picking up like Edwardian phrases and mannerisms and like?
You certainly get used to the language
Right.
quite quickly, and it's hard to cut, actually. That's been interesting. Cutting suffrage plays performance, which obviously I would never want to do, but when we've worked together, Beth, you necessarily have to cut a play for performance or like cut extracts for this. When I first started, I was going, I can't cut any of these words. But learning to translate the concepts in it, or try and cut the concepts and really bear down to what they're absolutely saying, all down to what they're saying, is quite interesting. But yeah, I find it much easier now to to hear plays from that period and to understand them. It's a bit like getting into Shakespeare, isn't it? It takes you a while to tune in. Certainly with Edwardian language and reading it, reading novels, reading speeches, I've kind of tuned into that way of speaking. It's quite nice, actually. Yeah. And there are words I want to reintroduce into my vocabulary, like titivate, for example, which I find very pleasing.
Is that like titillate?
No, it's sort of primping or moving something around. There's a brilliant play with this woman. It's called The Smack, actually, and it's set on. I think it's set in I can't remember, but it's written by an actress called Rose Matthews, and this woman is basically being sent abroad to try and find her husband, and she doesn't realise that. And then when she does realise, she comes down with a sort of sign on her going, "Woman for sale, single woman for sale, anyone interested?" It's really interesting. But the woman of the house comes down and titivates her bosom area in the mirror just to check that she looks. And I was like, that is amazing. Yeah, and also X's like connexion. They write Connexion sometimes. I really like connexion. It feels quite pleasing to say.
Yes.
Sexual.
Yeah.
Connexion. I like that.
The lexicon.
I'm going to start saying titivate.
Titivate everything.
I like that. The thing that I find amazing and fascinating about you, because I don't know that many actors, performers and academics. How did that journey start to begin from going from being an actor into going into research and academia, and how do you find one maybe informs the other in terms of research and practice, if they do?
I think they do. I think I didn't realise this at the time, but I think I've got a different take on this movement and these plays because of my experience as a performer and my involvement in feminist activism. That's why it speaks to me, not just because of the theatre history side of it. I've always been struck by how much I think is relatable and how much I think is more nuanced than maybe some of the stuff that we have today. And actually part of the reason for looking back is going, look, some of these concepts have been chewed out before. Let's build on that. Let's not just redo it again. So I found it when I was working. I was in a play at Novello. I found some of the scripts and started doing readings. Little readings in my dressing room. It's the privilege of being a working actor, actually, rather than out of work actor, because you're always hustling for work. When you're working, you've got your days free to kind of think and do stuff, and that was a real joy. And then I started doing larger readings, and then ended up doing a reading at the Novello with some of the grown-up actors in the company. And everyone kept saying to me, "Are you going to write a play?" And I was like, "No, I'm not a playwright. I just wanted to find out more, and I wanted to hear these things." And so eventually, then I went on tour again, then I applied to do the PhD, which was a bit mad. And I thought, well, if they accept me, I'll do it, and if they don't, I'll just keep researching anyway.
Who was your PhD with?
So it was with the University of Manchester. So I got accepted, but then I couldn't start because I didn't have any funding, and I'd been out of academia for such a long time, not since drama school actually, so it'd been a good 10 years. And then I was in Hong Kong with a show called Stickman. I was in that, and the Hong Kong producer gave me enough money to start my first term part-time. So I started my first term part-time, and then I actually applied to Equity Charitable Trust for funding for my PhD, and they gave me most of my fees. So then that paid my fees, and then I just worked full-time. So I mostly worked as a dresser in box office, and doing comedy and other bits of performance, and then worked all the way through. So I wasn't based in Manchester, based in London, did it mostly via Skype. And then I did some teaching at Manchester and just hustled, really. And then I finished it. So I finished it in 4 years. So 1 year part-time and then 3 years full-time.
You mentioned this game that you've got out.
Yes.
Suffrage.
Suffrage.
A card game for rebels of all ages. I love it.
Good.
So you've, it's like a game that you can put in people's stocking, but it's also a little profile of some of the people that you've researched.
So it's like Suffrage Top Trumps. This happened. I was doing my PhD. I was working as a dresser at the Comedy Theatre, now the Pinter, the Comedy Theatre, and I wanted to do Suffrage Top Trumps. So this has got 30 different suffrage campaigners who mostly campaign in the UK, women, men, and then they are judged on 4 different scores. So fame, creativity, daring and legacy, carefully worded categories. So you can learn a little bit more about them and play a kind of top trumps game. And I love it. Working with an illustrator called Kat Crossley, who runs something called Clavis and Claustra. She has an amazing suffragette range already, and she's also met her through Women's Equality Party stuff. And so the Government Inequalities Office actually bought 500 of these to give to women and men at the events they were holding at the end of last year. So I'm going to be chuffed that they're out. And we launched them here, actually, on the Courage Everywhere pop-up day at the National. I blew up some big ones, and then we had people playing them, and that's been really interesting. So again, just kind of there's only two actresses in it. I'd love to have done. I wanted to do an Actors Franchise League expansion pack, but unfortunately we had to include the names everyone knows as well. But it's just fun to play, and I was playing it with a friend in a pub. I don't play it all the time. I'm just saying.
Just always got a pack in your pocket just in case it gets boring.
I went to an exhibition about women in medicine actually, and then we were playing it in a pub, and some blokes looked over and went, "What's that game? That looks really good," and took pictures of it. So I couldn't be more chuffed.
And we buy these ones off me.
So they're at the Museum of London, they're at Lancaster Castle, Birmingham Museum and Gallery.
Do they have them
Leicester.
in the gift shop here at the National?
Yes, they do have them in the gift shop at the National. National Archives as well. So yeah, just spread the love.
Great. Suffer great.
Suffer great. And I suppose for any of our listeners who certainly feel inspired by hearing about your work and research, do you have any advice for people who are like, oh, maybe they've heard about someone, or they have a little nugget of, oh, I'm kind of interested in that. What advice would you give to people who maybe want to go into doing research of their own?
I would say go for it. I think you need to have, there needs to be a huge reason why you want to do it. There needs to be, and that might change while you're doing it. That can change. I think you need to feel that there's a question you want to answer, or there's information you want to gather, and you need to have a supervisor that you feel really confident can not only inspire you but also help you. It's an exam really to get you through those checkpoints of the exam. And the thing about the PhD is it feels like this enormous ladder, kind of reaching into the clouds when you first do it. And then when you get to the end of it, all you can see is the bottom of other ladders. It just carries on and on. And now I'm in the position where I'm doing postdoc jobs, and then all the hierarchies carry on, and the learning carries on. So really, it feels like a big insurmountable thing. It's not. It's totally doable. It is hard. It's supposed to be hard. But it's just an utter treat to be able to devote your time and energy and brain. That brain, I could feel my brain going, ooh, we haven't had to do this chewiness for a while, to learn that. And I've been very much about sharing it. That's because I'm researching theatre, and that's not meant to be read, that's meant to be spoken. If you're doing something more literary, you might find different opportunities for public engagement. But if you're doing practices research, to really delve into your practice and to look at other practitioners and the history of that, and to be able to speak about it in different ways, I think is hugely valuable. But thinking is the privilege. To have the privilege and the time to think and be challenged about those thoughts, and kind of approach them from different angles, and then come in again and change, to unlearn your biases as much as possible, to unlearn what you think you know and then relearn. The privilege of that and the time it takes for that is amazing. But I don't think the ticky box doctorate necessarily is the way forward, but just all for everybody. And it's expensive, and the job market at the other end of it is not great. Of people who want to be traditional academics or anything else, and you certainly don't. I've not found that I've raised my my salary opportunities by having a PhD in any way, shape or form. If I was going to do that, I'd probably do a PGCE. I'd get paid more for having a PGCE than I would for having a PhD. But the privilege of thinking has just been amazing. I never would have thought it would have come to this. I'm just delighted, and I'm looking forward to revisiting this in a few years. And I really hope. My big book of the PhD came out in May, and I was saying at the launch, I really hope that some PhD student one day goes, oh well, Paxton says this, she's completely wrong. Fine, great. Do you know what I mean? At least that means someone's read it, and someone else is researching those documents, and somebody else. I really want people to engage with it and find their own stuff and disagree with me. I'm really fine. I'm a person that plays with other people. I've not kept this to myself. I've gone, look what I found. Come and play with it. It's problematic, isn't it? Ooh, or it's inspiring, isn't it? Or where are the voices in here? Let's talk about that. Let's dig more. Let's find more. So I haven't tried to keep it all to myself in any way, shape or form. But yeah, I would encourage people to engage with research in different ways, and to articulate their thoughts, and to talk to other people about their thoughts, because that's the main part of it really. And if you can afford to do a PhD, great, do it. Just make sure that you grit your teeth and go, this is possible. Don't believe all the negative hype. Just grit your teeth and get through it, and pick a good supervisor. That's what I would say.
So apart from being an academic, the other thing that we know you as, yes, and how you earn some of your money doing your PhD is as a comic.
Yes.
Yeah, funny lady. And your funny lady character is Ada Campe.
She is.
Has any of your Suffrage stuff informed what you've done with your comedy or your comedy characters? Have you had any opportunities, or has it just been completely like, these are two separate things that I do with my life and I can do one and leave behind the other and do the other? And
because of the theatre research, so she's a kind of sort of variety character. So she's kind of old. People think she's sort of Victorian. She's not. She's very now. She's got a Twitter account, but she kind of harks back to a previous age. So often I'll find quirky stories like from the Victorian Edwardian theatre that I'll fit in. I haven't really done much Suffrage stuff with Ada because it's sort of separate worlds, and I go with what she does. But the thing that has made me super happy about her is so the past two kind of large Women's Equality Party conferences. I got asked if I'd perform Ada at the comedy night, and that made me so happy because I've been researching performers who do their party pieces for the cause, you know, and I wasn't there to talk about Suffrage theatre. I was there to do my sort of titting about.
She is very silly, for anyone who hasn't had the joy
but to
of
be
seeing
on
Ada
stage
Campe.
at a big feminist club, which is kind of sort of, so the parallels of that have been lovely. And I've had some weird moments, like some guy came to see me in Edinburgh a couple of years ago and then messaged me saying, "Oh, that was very funny, thank you very much," and then looked up my other research and then came up to the National Archives late I did and saw me do a talk about Suffrage theatre. So you never know. And they've been strange. Yeah, there have been a few little. I don't deliberately keep them separate, but I also never try and combine them because different worlds as well.
You mean you don't sit in the British Library in the full Ada Campe makeup with a wig? That would shock those guys.
I go, shush! Shut up! I'm trying to read.
Yeah, Ada wouldn't put up with that.
She wouldn't put up with that. But in terms of feminist performers and working with like-minded people, that's been a real joy as well. So I actually probably quite atypical. I've mostly worked with women and mostly continue to work with women on bills and lineups, and I programme women as much as possible. So yeah, it's been an interesting one. I love doing it though because my agent dropped me when I started doing my PhD because I wasn't free to do anything
as an actor.
Yeah, as an actor, and so I did a bit, but then I'd been an actor, you know, and I was like, oh no. And I didn't do the PhD because I wanted to give up acting. It was a different thing. So I'm still in Spotlight. But Ada she was my sort of odd little party piece, strange thing that I did. And she's sort of become my performance outlet in that way, even though actually I do lots more performing now as myself, emceeing events and doing talks and performances, which is interesting. Another different way of presenting yourself in public.
Yes, I read something about carry on curating.
Yeah, the V&A.
What's that?
So it's a kind of stand-up night at the V&A. So the first one was around, they just acquired Tommy Cooper's archive.
Oh.
So we had John Lloyd, Nish Kumar, I'm going to forget someone actually, that's terrible. So that was about that. And then last year we did a sort of stand-up version. So we had Jan Ravens, Tanya Moore, and I curated those. I found an interesting space actually of being sort of academic-y historian strokey beard person plus performance grinny person. So I've ended up doing emceeing, emceeing for Museum Show Off, emceeing for, like we did a comedy night for LSE Library about suffrage, where people came and talked about their suffrage research. And other things, chairing panels for funny women events as myself, for example. So that's been interesting to learn to present myself in a different way. I don't do stand-up as myself, I do stand-up as Ada, but even though I'm not acting anymore, I found a different way to present myself in public that's kind of about being a researcher but also being a human person and a performer. So that's an interesting outcome that I never would have anticipated. But yeah.
Cool. Have you got any Ada gigs coming up that you can plug for our listeners if they're curious about this character?
Yes, well, if you've got kids, I'm doing a comedy club for kids at Finchley Arts Depot this Saturday, and the Comedian in Brighton in a couple of weeks' time. We're down in Guildford doing a lock-in cabaret on the 9th of Feb. I'm at Hackney Empire on the 2nd of Feb, which I am gagged and gooped about because Hackney Empire.
Yeah.
What are you doing at Hackney Empire?
Well, it's the New Act of the Year final. So last year, Ada Campe won New Act of the Year. I think I'm the third woman ever to have done that in the history of New Act of the Year. So that means I get to perform at the final this year, which is at Hackney Empire. I am super excited about that. And gigs at the Poodle Club in Sydenham. So I'm around. You can check. If you look, so my website is www.naomipaxton.co.uk. If you look on the comedy page there, you can see upcoming gigs, and if you look on the news page, you can see upcoming talks. I'm doing one at the Royal Academy of Music next week about the performers and composers that were part of the suffrage movement. And then there's some other stuff coming up as well. So yeah, it's a portfolio career. That's what we call it, a portfolio career.
And multi-hyphenate. That's a word that I learned recently. That I was like,
Aren't we
that's
all?
what I'm going to say I am.
Multi-hyphenate?
Multi-hyphenate, as in like actor,
slashes,
comedian, academic.
Your
blah, blah,
words
blah.
of the podcast are
Yeah.
multi-hyphenate and titivate. So the exhibition is on until the 26th of January at the National Theatre in the Littleton Lounge. If you're in London or can get to London and would like to see it, please do. All the exhibition videos, which are extracts of suffrage plays, are all available on YouTube under the playlist Dramatic Progress. And if you're interested in any quirky suffrage stories, then I've blogged about quite a few.
We will link to all of them.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Something that we ask all our guests is what we call our feminist faves, which is people, things, books, articles. I feel like you will have a wealth of things. We ask who they want to plug to our listeners.
Maybe something that you haven't already talked about.
Yeah. So Vik Groskop's book, How to Own the Room, is fantastic if you're interested in public speaking. She takes examples from women speakers, many different types of speakers. She's great. She's a comic and writer and a journalist, so I would totally recommend that. Can I recommend an old book? Cicely Hamilton, suffrage playwright, 1909 book, I think, called Marriage as a Trade. Absolutely amazing, chewy book. Another thing you can look up online is Elizabeth Robbins, 1B. She wrote a book, which pulls together loads of her articles called Way Stations, W-A-Y stations. Emilia at the Globe, which I'm desperate to see.
Oh yeah. That's going to be on at the Vaudeville Theatre.
Vaudeville.
Best End transfer. Yeah,
Okay.
really excited to see that.
What's yours?
Okay, mine is, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget all the names, but I went to the Modern Couples exhibition at the Barbican the other day. I actually went for a walking tour held by Elf Lions.
Hey.
And I struggle with exhibition spaces because I don't know, I find it hard to read the placards and take in all the information. And actually the tour was amazing, and obviously Elf made it funny, brought all these amazing people to life. So maybe, I'm trying to think of someone specific from there. Maybe Claude Cahun, who was, they described their gender as neuter, which, now we could consider within the realm of being non-binary. And they were just an amazing artist, photographer, Nazi fighting hero, who I had never heard of before. Many people might have, but I had never. So I think they're amazing. And I recommend the exhibition as well.
I think that's a beautiful relationship in that exhibition because the two of them were stepsisters.
Oh,
Their
yes,
parents
of course.
were married, they got together as teenagers and lived as a couple for their whole lives.
So they could live together as well because they were family. They could kind of get away with living together and being seen out together.
And then being buried next to each other.
For your international listeners, if there's anybody in the Netherlands, can I recommend an exhibition at Amsterdam Museum, 1001 Women of the 20th Century, which is totally amazing, about the history of amazing things Dutch women have done over the 20th century.
Ooh,
Stunning.
Cool.
Stunning.
So my feminist fave is a podcast called She's All Fat, and it's about the body positivity movement, and it's two fat women talking about their experiences of being fat, and they have guests on, and it was recommended to me by an actress called Davinia Hamilton, who I've been working with on an R&D about women and stuff like that. So we were doing like this kind of intense week of feminist devising together, and we all kind of were recommending a lot of things to each other so that we can find a shared language in order to create performances together. And Davinia's recommendation was She's All Fat podcast, and I have just been devouring it. So that's a really good one, and it just makes me feel awesome about the future of bodies.
great.
Yeah,
Sounds
and
good.
it's fun and funny. Yes.
Perfect.
Well, Dr. Naomi Paxton.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining
Oh,
us.
thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a joy.
And thank you for your continuing and ongoing enthusiasm and spreading the word about feminist theatre history, 'cause it's very
I literally
important.
can't help it.
It's an impulse.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As promised, here is our Bechdel Theatre Vault Festival 2019 recommended list. Get your pen and paper because it's about to get high recommended up in here.
Okay.
I didn't know how to finish that.
Also, they will all be in the notes. The first show we're recommending is called Inside Voices. It's on from January 23rd to January 27th. Shines a spotlight on Southeast Asian Muslim women exploring feminism, faith and freedom.
Whoop whoop. Also, Juniper and Jules on January the 23rd to the 27th, so same dates, which is a play that has existed for maybe like the past year or so, and explores bisexuality and polyamory and non-monogamy. We've been hearing great things about it. Juniper and Jules.
Also in the first week of the festival, Dangerous Lenses and Lola, which are two brand new plays from Paper Cut Theatre, who we are big fans of, supporting new writers and directors working together.
17 is also in the first week, Jan 23rd to 27th, which is the new play from the theatre company Wildcard, who we saw in Edinburgh with their show Electrolyte, which was incredible. The previous show explored mental health and had like a live band, and so we've seen great things of Wildcard Theatre Company so far, and we think 17 is going to be great. They're also shortlisted for the Underbelly Untapped Award, and this is about two school friends, Yasmin and Casey.
Next up is Salam, which is on January 30th till Feb the 3rd, and that is set in London 2017 on the first night of Ramadan. A mother and daughter prepare to break the fast. So it's about a mother-daughter relationship, it's about Islam, it's about modern-day contemporary London.
Also, one which has super been on our radar is Fatty Fat Fat, which is on from Jan the 30th till Feb the 3rd. Fatty Fat Fat is a funny, frank and provocative solo show about living in a body the world tells you to hate. Leave your diet books at the door.
Hear Me Howl, in the same week, January 30th to Feb 3rd, is about Jess, who's turning 30 when she presses pause on conventional life and joins a post-punk band.
Whoop whoop. Love a post-punk band. Succubus is on the 1st of February, which is a comedy night raising money for some amazing charities, Gendered Intelligence, Mermaids, and Educate and Celebrate, which are all amazing charities that support LGBTQ plus people, particularly Gendered Intelligence and Mermaids for trans young people. And Educate and Celebrate is a charity that goes into schools and uses arts and song to educate and celebrate LGBTQAI plus identities within schools.
And also that night, Jordan Gray is hosting and Kima Bob, who's one of our faves, is performing. So it should be an amazing, hilarious night out, as well as raising money for good, worthy charities.
Also, we were looking at the Succubus website, and someone very aptly said that Succubus were like the feminist Onion, if you know the Onion satirical news webpage, and that person was not wrong. I highly recommend you check it out because there's a lot of really funny content on there. So we have high hopes for Succubus. We think it's going to be great.
Speaking of funny, the LOL Word, which is one of our absolute favourites. It's all queer women and non-binary people doing stand-up comedy. They have one night on January 25th, which is sold out already, and then they've got two more on February 15th and March 15th. So you've got two more chances to see them as part of Vault Festival, and we highly recommend you get your tickets soon because they will sell out.
Also, you might see us there. Speaking of some of our faves, you know we love them. We are sure you love them too. Pecs Drag King Collective are doing their night, King for a Night, which is on February the 2nd, which I believe is a Saturday, which is a love letter to the London drag king scene. So not only will it be some of our favourite Pecs lads, they are also creating a platform for other kings as well.
And they have a Become a King booth, so you can get your own drag king, find your own drag king, and we will definitely 100% be there because we've already got our tickets.
Yes, this is very true.
More funny from Elf Lions. Love Songs to Guinea Pigs, her brand new show where Elf, who we've talked about many times on this podcast before, embodies her inner Elton John on an absurd narrative of love, heartbreak, hospitals, friendship, romance, and relearning your own body, as well as rodents, because Elf is a big guinea pig fan and has recently adopted 2 guinea pigs. She's become a guinea pig mum.
She has. I actually got to meet them and they are adorable.
Yay!
So yeah, I really think she says that the show is probably like the most personal show that she's done yet, so that sounds really like something to support and go see. Also, Shotgun Carousel, who recently did Divine Proportions.
We loved it so much.
So great. Are doing a anti-Valentine's riot party called Eat Your Heart Out, and it is on February the 16th, so it's actually after V-Day. So even if you have V-Day plans, there is no reason why you cannot come to this. Also featuring the band Dreamnail. So speaking of like pop punk earlier, Dreamnails are going to be performing at Shotgun Carousel amongst some other live music and performances as far as we know. So that sounds really great, to be honest. I feel like we're going to be buying our tickets very soon.
That's going to be a great fun night. The next show we have to recommend is called, get this title, Smoke Weed, Eat Pussy Every Day. And it's on February 22nd to 23rd. And it is about what happens when drugs are the only home you have to go back to. So Chloe, the writer-performer, it's her debut show. It's a semi-autobiographical spoken word theatre solo show, and it's about her experiences, and it involves drugs and homelessness and queerness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So smoke weed, eat pussy every day.
And like the underground London rave scene. It seems really, really great. And I hope it's a show that will go on to have like a bigger, longer future, because it is only on for 2 nights. And it's definitely the kind of show that I feel like could take over many other spaces and even Edinburgh, you know, that kind of thing. So we really want to see it now so we can get an idea of what it could be.
You can say, I was there first in the beginning.
Exactly. Also is I Will Still Be Whole When You Rip Me in Half, which is on February the 27th to the 28th. So again, 2 nights. It is a poetic interlinking of monologues devoted to family, inherited trauma, and the essential violence of whiteness, which is written by Ava Wong Davies and explores East Asian identity and queerness and mother-daughter relationships, and seems all round amazing. So I really, really want to see this.
February 22nd to March 3rd, there's a show called Woman, Pilot, Pirate. And it says Amelia Earhart, who was a famous pilot, has been missing for 81 years. Emmy, the character in the play, thinks this is wrong. She intends to rescue her hero. So it's kind of a quest to go and find her hero and help her out.
I love the amount of shows that are kind of like bringing historical figures to life.
It seems to be a real trend at Vault Festival this year.
Yeah, especially I feel like for me personally, like even after talking to Naomi and now like understanding about all these amazing women throughout history and like, why don't I know about this? I need to learn more. And theatre is a great place for these people to come to life. So this show sounds like definitely something to go see.
And actually the next show is a similar theme. It's called Galvanise, February 22nd to March 27th to March 3rd again. And this one is 3 schoolgirls in South London who discover the stories of 3 different women from history, so all different periods of history, and these stories become relevant to the girls. They become rousing and frightening, electrifying their present and warping their futures. So they become influenced by these women from history that they find out about.
I can definitely relate to that, especially after what we've just been saying. Also, Brazilian Wax XXL, which is on the 2nd of March. Brazilian Wax is brought to you by the creators of Fuck You Pay Me, the amazing show by Joanna Nastari that we saw in Edinburgh, which is also transferring to the Bunker. And Brazilian Wax is a filthy, riotous, queer Latin dance party. Expect caipirinhas, expect pole dancing, expect stripping, expect Latin tunes, expect everything.
Brazilian mum-made snacks.
I know, I saw that. I was like, yes, what is that?
Amazing.
I would also like to plug the Family Jules takeover of the Vault Festival, which is on March the 8th, which is also International Women's Day. The Family Jules is a brand new drag king collective, which Beth happens to be in. What can we expect, Beth?
You can expect to spend International Women's Day with a bunch of men. Yay! So the Family Jewels show is a cabaret show. It's all the things you expect from that. Singing, lip-syncing, comedy. And it's set in a future in 3019 where all the trolls and the internet comments are right and men have in fact been banned. So it's about all our drag king characters existing in this world where they're not allowed to be themselves and their brave struggle. Come and see it. It's a late night show, so you can do everything else you want to do on International Women's Day and then spend the night with the Family Jewels.
Can I Touch Your Hair is up next, which starts on March the 8th and goes on till March the 9th. So again, that's only 2 nights. Why are so many shows only having 2 nights? We want to see them. Yeah, we want to see them all have longer runs, but I'm sure that they will do in the future. Can I Touch Your Hair is created by Lakani Chirwa, who was on our 2nd ever episode of the Bechdel Theatre podcast. Lakani shares the memories of what it was like for her growing up in Cumbria with Afro hair and kind of like her journey of her hair journey and cultural appropriation and people touching her hair when she doesn't want them to. Lakani's been going on a wonderful journey with the show, and we're really excited to see that it's landing at Vault Festival and is a really important look at blackness and being mixed race and hair. So go see it.
The final recommendation we have for you for the last week of Vault Festival is a play called 10, which is written by Lizzie Milton and directed by Nastasia Summers, who first teamed up as part of our Bechdel Testing Life project in 2017, which I'm just doing the tax return for. Yay! So that's present in my mind. But they have a new show that's in Vault Festival. It's a devised show. No, wait, it's not a devised show. Is that they have a new show at Vault Festival called 10. It is 10 stories of all different women from history. So again, it's this theme of learning her story at Vault Festival this year. So it's 10 stories, 5 performers, and 1 riotous celebration of history's heroines.
Ooh.
If you're interested in more shows at Vault Festival than the ones that we've recommended today, there are a lot more. They have something like 375 shows. We have compiled a spreadsheet, or we haven't compiled it, but we've opened up a spreadsheet to be edited by participants of Vault Festival to add shows that are by or featuring women of colour in the festival. So anyone can add themselves as long as they have a show that has a woman of colour in the cast or creative team. So if you're interested in supporting women of colour at Vault Festival, then have a look at that spreadsheet. That's on our Twitter page. And the Family Jewels has also launched a #VaultQueers campaign to link up all the companies that have queer shows at Vault Festival, and they've started a spreadsheet that has all of the shows with LGBTQIA+ performers. So have a look into those if you're interested in seeing more shows than the ones we recommended. If you're not at Vault Festival, if you want to see shows that are on elsewhere, either in London or on tour throughout the country, we've written a blog which covers not just January, February, but the whole year right up until the end of 2020. So we've got shows to see throughout the year and throughout the country on our blog, BechdelTheatre.com/blog.
So that concludes this episode, and stay tuned for next time.